Welcome back to another episode of the Unleash Your Radiance podcast. I am so excited to have an incredible guest here today. Amy, welcome to the Unleash Your Radiance podcast.
Thank you for having me. Happy Leo season
Ye-
also.
Yes, happy Leo season. I was going to mention that. I know you're a Leo, so I was thinking about you just actually as we entered in this season as well. Amy, I always love to ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what does a radiant living mean to you?
I think radiant living, and definitely a woman who is in that radiance, is free or freeing herself from shame. So I feel like you can really tell when people have been on this journey of unshaming themselves, healing their trauma, giving less fucks, becoming more unapologetic, because it usually like radiates out of their skin. It's like a secret serum. And I think you really see that natural beauty and radiance come out of a woman when she isn't tied down by good girl conditioning, people pleasing, shame, the fear of what other people think. And then you see it in the way that a woman like that is living her life, like the choices she's making, the risks she's taking, the dreams she's chasing. And that radiance is not just an aesthetic, it's really like embodied in everything that she's doing. And it's an aspirational energy, I think. I think people want to be about it, they're drawn to it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I absolutely love that explanation of it. I think that's so powerful. And really it's so true when you said that, like it's like this serum. I'm just picturing like how women are always put in like retinol cream and like collagen serum, but it's like that I can actually like picture that. It's like you freeing yourself and it's just like this radiant glow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And it is that like magnetic embodiment. And I know you so much stand for unleashing the unapologetic woman within, and your work is very much around female empowerment and creating that like radiant life as well. And I was so pulled to your own story through my own journey as well. I felt very empowered listening to your work and your podcast as well. And I'd love to dive a little bit into your own story because I know you've gone through quite a transformation on your own journey with trauma and things, and it really brought you to step into this path as well to help women really unlock their full potential. So yeah, I'd love to dive a little bit into how this came about.
Yeah. I mean, more than 10 years ago now, I had like my crunch point, like the turning point in my story, if you will. So, in my early 20s, I had been on a downward spiral for a while, but I wasn't really like present to how bad it was. I think sometimes you don't realize how intense things are, how much you're struggling until you really look back and you have that hindsight. But for me, I was kind of like a perfectionist mixed with a good girl, but also mixed with like a naughty bad girl, like a secret bad girl. So I would, work really hard in my career. I had a really like glamorous job in fashion, at least on the surface. I was ticking all the boxes externally in my life, but I was also partying really hard, taking drugs, smoking a lot, had really toxic relationships. I was completely dissociated from my emotions, from my body. And I was also like self-medicating with a lot of those behaviors, addictions and patterns. And so I went through a really traumatic breakup that was also a breakup with a friend of mine at the same time. And then I got pneumonia and I was really like not in a good place. I was having suicidal ideation and panic attacks. It was starting to affect my job. And I thought, I think that people go and see therapists. I don't really know what that is, but I'm literally desperate because I'm having these thoughts. I'm not wanting to stick around. So I went and I found a therapist. She lived like 100 meters up the street from me. So it was like easy to say yes and not resist it.
Yeah.
And through that journey, very quickly, she diagnosed me with PTSD. And I started unraveling, like, how did I get to this point? Like, how did it get to this stage? How did it get this bad? And from there, I started addressing the root causes underneath all of these behaviors. Like, these weren't coincidental things that I was experiencing or choosing. There was deep layers of trauma underneath that for me. There was a lot of shame that was manifesting as these poor choices and poor habits and addictions and ways of being. And that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of healing, exploring more holistic methods, and getting to the root of my PTSD, which was a combination of things. But one of the root traumas for me was sexual trauma and being abused when I was young. And so a lot of that then culminated in the inspiration for the work that I now do, which is me fulfilling a promise that I made, which is like, if I can get through this, God, I'm going to go and help other people. I'm going to share the information with other women so that when they're lost and they're alone and they don't know what to do, someone like me exists and is really loud on the internet so that they can find me and figure out the next steps. Because I really feel like I was doing a lot of stuff on my own in the beginning. Social media wasn't how it was now. And so, yeah, that's kind of like the story underneath the passion and the mission that I have now.
Wow. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing that. And like that, I know so many women can probably see themselves in that story as well, and feeling that shame and not knowing where to turn. And you know, I know myself from my own journey definitely have used substances, the partying, the drinking, the drugs, you know, really having those things manifest in behaviors as well, from unresolved things as well from past. So when you actually do dive into that deep healing journey and understand, okay, I'm operating this way because of the XYZ, it brings so much light to you. You're like, okay, now I can actually work through this to heal as well. So thank you so much for sharing. And I think it's so important to have people like yourself who are very loud on the internet and unapologetic and sharing their message, because people are afraid to speak up, right? Of being shamed about it, or of being judged, or that fear of being seen is so huge. Which I actually wanted to bring to my next topic about talking about the good girl conditioning. And I know that's something that you really are unapologetic yourself in talking about. But as women, we do feel this pressure to, like, you know, of how we grew up to be a certain way. Don't be too much, don't be too loud, like, you know, make others feel comfortable. And really, how did that unfold for you in a way? And is that something like, how do you really see that manifesting in the women that you've worked with?
Yeah, I feel like it's this ever unfolding onion because I'm still meeting different layers and depths of my own good girl conditioning. You know,
Yeah.
even like recently I've had to have some difficult conversations, and you know, I feel that part of me come up that doesn't want to hurt the other person, that doesn't want to upset them. And so like part of what my inner good girl does is she takes it for the team. She's like, I'll hurt myself so I don't hurt you, or I'll
Mm.
make myself uncomfortable because I can take this one on the chin and I don't want to, you know, harm you. But underneath that, actually, because it sounds quite selfless, doesn't it? But underneath that is actually a deeper wound, which is I don't want to feel the shame that I might feel if you get upset with me. Right. So it like masquerades as selflessness a lot of the time, you know, not wanting to hurt other people's feelings, not wanting to ruffle feathers, saying yes to people because you don't want to disappoint them. You know, all of these things, when we look at the surface, we think it's because I'm being a nice person. It's because I care about you. It's because I don't want to hurt this person that I love. But underneath it, there's usually a more selfish reason. And I
Mm.
use the word selfish not in like a judgy way. It's just a more self-centered and self-preserving reason, which is to avoid feeling our deepest shame, to avoid feeling like we might actually be a bad person. We might be a bad girl. And so when we can like own that there is this selfishness underneath our good girl, then we can actually take responsibility for it and then truly show up as kind women, right? Because there's a difference between being nice and being kind. There's a difference between saying yes when you really want to say yes and being super generous, or giving from resentment and fear and manipulation, right? Sometimes our good girl is actually like a manipulative strategy to keep us safe. And so the layers of this and how it shows up for people, it's so different from woman to woman. But what I really love helping women get to is, what is the shame underneath it that causes the pattern? Because
Mm.
if we can give the shame underneath it redemption, then the pattern doesn't need to exist anymore. And that's how you heal it. That's how you step into being more unapologetic, more bold, more authentic. Because those patterns of your good girl do stop you from being fully authentic. And, you know, if you look deeper than that, if you're not being fully authentic, how can you ever have the most deep, intimate, loving relationships that you could have if you're not
Yeah.
being who you really
Yeah, that is so true. And it really does come down to that shame, doesn't it? And do you see that like there's different kinds of shame that really come up for different women? Like it's all quite individual, or do you see a recurring pattern quite often underneath all that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting because two people might hold a similar story of shame, but present completely differently. Like
Yeah.
you could have someone who is a drug addict and someone who is, you know, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company who have the same shame, but the patterns manifest differently. So the
Mm,
patterns are there to like protect that shame from getting brought to the surface. It's like to cover it up. So we develop overcompensating patterns. Right. So for some people, that's being a people pleaser.
yeah.
For some people, the way that they avoid feeling that shame is through addiction and helplessness, feeling like they are the victim of that addiction and there's nothing that they can do. And then that addiction is a way for them to numb out or self medicate and not have to actually feel the even deeper pain, which is the shame. But then for other people, like someone who's a CEO, you know, some of their really good qualities that have helped them become really rich and successful are the same things that were developed as a response to that shame. It's like, I don't want to feel that shame. I don't want to feel that I'm deep down bad at my core. And so I'm going to become really good at everything. I'm going to be the best. I'm, you know, never going to lose because then I won't have to touch that part of me. It doesn't have to come to the surface. Um, but what happens is for all of these people, whenever you have something that's deeply buried and a lot of patterns that have been developed to keep it that way, is that you can start to see people get like burnt out, for example, even if they're not actually working that much, right? They're having like an emotional burnout because it's a
Mm,
lot of energy to keep things repressed. It's
yeah.
a lot of energy to keep this underlying stress in your body hidden somewhere. So regardless of how it shows up for people, the process is tracking what are the things that I do to cover up that shame? What does the shame actually sound like? You know, what's the experience of that shame? And how do I give that part of me redemption? Right? How do we give that part of you forgiveness? How do we give that part of you permission to exist? And when we do that, we realize, like, oh, the shame isn't going to kill me. I
Mm.
let it exist. I let it have a voice. I let it have a space to be. And then it can sometimes heal, you know, or at least dissolve and not have such a chokehold on you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, 100%. I definitely experienced that. A few years ago, I decided to like give up alcohol and go on the sober curious journey. And when I did, wow, I realized all the things that I had been suppressing, like emotionally, that I'd never really dealt with, that I had to work through. Definitely felt like a dark night of the soul happening, but it was so needed in
Mm,
order to come out on the other side and address all those things in order to heal. And yeah, it was so good to have that happen. And one thing that caught my attention was you were saying with the CEOs, for instance, where it's like, oh, I'll just be really good at all of these things. And I tend to have a lot of like high achieving women, ambitious women who are listeners who I work with as well. And that's like a really common one of like, I won't be loved if I don't, succeed or do well, because maybe it could have been from their parents who are like, you need, in order to get good grades, like, then we'll show you that love that you're craving, or, you need to achieve XYZ in order to be seen as high value in our eyes. And that's such a common one that I see as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Going on to people pleasing as well. That is a very big common one we see in women. And I wanted to talk about diving a little bit more into the relationship aspect. So there's definitely people pleasing in so many different relationship aspects. Going to the topic of man pleasing. Now, this is something that I've struggled with in my past. I definitely used to attract the emotionally unavailable men. And I know that there are so many women as well who can be these like powerful leaders. But then when it comes to like dating, they make themselves smaller when it comes to like fit
mhm.
into that mold of like wanting to attract that certain type of man or hoping he likes me or certain things like that. And yeah, I would love to get your kind of take on how that shows up and maybe some of the women you've worked with or patterns you see when that plays out.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes complete sense that this would be the case for so many people because
Yeah.
we live in a society that from birth teaches us to contort ourselves in order to be acceptable
Mhm.
and to belong, to follow the rules, to uh, scan the room and notice how other people are perceiving you, to derive our worth externally through external results, through the grades we get in school, through the beauty that we see in the mirror, through the likes that we get on Instagram, through whether other people deem our existence acceptable or not.
Mhm.
So we live in this world that very much teaches us and celebrates external validation. So, like, you're valid, you're worthy, and you're chosen when something outside of you says so.
Mhm.
Whereas, it's not so commonplace to be like, no, that comes from the inside. It doesn't matter if someone around you chooses you. It doesn't matter if people disagree or they're not validating you. Do you validate you? Do you like who you are? Do you feel good about your choices? So it's quite a process for a lot of people to untangle from those behaviors in love, because love especially is very important to us, right? it's
Mhm.
it's part of not just our desires, it's part of our system of needs, right? We need connection as human beings. We are interdependent, we thrive together. And so when you have such a deep rooted pattern that's influenced by society, it's connected to your needs and survival, it's hard to untangle from the ways that you've learned to be. But I think the work for these women, especially for anyone who is listening, who knows that you do that, is like, it's so cliche, but it's like learning how to choose yourself first. Because
Yeah.
if you don't know how to validate yourself, you're always going to be hungry for the validation of another, and you're going to do whatever it takes to try and get it. Right. So if you're starving of that self love, of course, you're going to be hungry and doing what it takes to get that need met with whoever is in front of you. And, one of the things that I also suggest to my friends and my clients is, when you're dating, a lot of women look at the man that they're dating, whoever they're dating. And a lot of the focus is like, does he like me? Does he like it when I do this? How do I get him to do this? How do I get him to take me on a date? Why isn't he texting me? And I really think the focus should be back on yourself and being like, do I like the way that he's showing up right now? Do I like the way that I feel in this person's presence? Like, do I even like you? Rather than, do they like me? What do they need from me? And it can be very uncomfortable to do this because you have to sit in like a bit of in between. You have to deal with maybe more rejection than you're used to because you're suddenly not contorting yourself like a puppet to just match what you think that person wants. You're showing up as you, and not everyone is going to like the real you. But if you want to be authentically loved, you got to be authentic. So it is uncomfortable. But the more that you work on choosing yourself, developing your self love, building your self esteem, like having other parts of your area, having other areas of your life where you get that validation. So, like from friends, from meaningful work, from hobbies, like whatever it is, the more that you fill that up, the less you're going to be starving for the validation elsewhere, particularly if, that manifests in unhealthy people pleasing for you.
Yeah, definitely. That is such a shift when you take that aspect of like, does he like me? Am I being the woman that it's like pretending to be the cool girl, which I know I've seen a
Mhm.
lot, the women I've worked with as well and friends, etc. And definitely have been guilty of that in the past. But when you take that focus on like, do I actually like him? Is he an ideal partner that I am looking for as well? There's such a shift in that energy, which is yeah, incredible. And I think it's so important, as you said, like having a full life already, right? Like having that richness in your life, whether that's through work, friends, hobbies, travel, because, what I've seen a lot as well is like, women can get so focused on this relationship and it like becomes absorbing. And then there's so much focus
Yeah.
on it. But what if that ends? And then there's like this emptiness that's left, right? But it's like having all of that fullness already. So you are validating like yourself through all of your external, or sorry, of all of your hobbies and things that you're already including in your life also, which is so important. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and what would you say, like, when it comes to really attracting in, like, that rich relationship, like, that deep, real love, is a lot of women are, like, calling in my king, or, like, I know you talk a lot about this, you've been in a very healthy, marriage as well, right, for quite some time. So
Yeah.
what is that, like, difference in really showing up and going after that, and what does that look like?
So, I mean, when I was doing my therapy, something we looked at a lot was my relationship with men,
Yeah.
and like why were things how they were, like what was my role in this? And
Mhm.
we really did quite a lot of shadow work around it, to be honest, like really owning my part in it. Like if there's a recurring pattern in your love life that you don't like, it sounds harsh, but it's true. You're the common denominator. Like
Mhm.
if you have dated 5 narcissists in a row and you're saying that you crave a king, like it's not about blame and it's not about condoning abusive behavior towards you, anything like that. But the most empowering thing, which is the bad news and the good news, is like you have the autonomy to look at like what part of me has chosen this, like if it's something that keeps happening. And if you are receiving something that you don't want to receive, there's something else that you do, you get to be responsible for like, okay, cool. How do I own my side of the street? And so, how do you own your side of the street? Getting super clear. What do you really want? What
Mhm.
are you a hard no for? And maybe even examining some of the things you write. Like maybe some of the things that you really think you want are superficial things that are coming from like your wounds or your ego. But getting really clear on what values do you want in your ideal partner? Like, how do you want that king to show up for you? Um, what are the things that you're willing to negotiate on, and what are the things that are really non-negotiable for you? And looking at even just nitty-gritty things like what relationship with money do you have, and do you want them to have the same thing? Because money is a really big cause of stress and divorces, things like that. I think it's really wise to think about that. If you know that you want to travel the world, you might not want to date someone who is never going to do that, or they have a job that they could never do that, or they have a very fixed mindset around how they want to live. So getting really clear on those things so that when you have someone in front of you and they're paying you attention, your logical brain can be present in the situation and go, okay, cool. I know that I feel really good and really validated because this hot guy who's giving me attention is making me feel really good. But, actually, discernment applied here. This person doesn't have the qualities and attributes and values that I really desire in my king. So then you're going to waste less time and you're going to have better dating experiences. The other thing I would say, and this is something I had to do when I wrote my list,
Mm.
I had to really face myself in the mirror and go, am I the kind of person that this man wants to date? And there were certain parts of me where I'm like, yeah, I'm kind and I'm loyal, and I did have some qualities. But then there are other things where I was like, wait a minute, I'm not on the level for this kind of person. How am I going to go out there and become that version of myself? And so
Mhm.
I went on a mission to do that. I really focused on, building my self-esteem, creating, more abundance for myself, doing things that I felt proud of, following through, really honoring my word when I made promises to myself and to other people. And so I went out there to become a match to this person. And about 2 years, about 2 years later, I met my husband. Yeah, 2 years later. I'm trying to figure out if we were married 2 years later after I did the list or not. I think I did the list in 2015, and then we were married in 2018. So like 3 years later, I was married,
Okay.
almost to the day of writing the list.
No way. Wow.
Yeah, which I only
Wow.
realized the other day because I had it in my camera roll in my phone, and I was like showing my husband, like, look, I manifested you. And I was like, oh my God, this is a day 3 years before we got married. So I really feel like if you want to call in the king, work on being the queen, work on like doing all the things that you want to do and becoming all the things that you want to be now, instead of waiting for a partner to kind of like unlock that journey for you. Because I think many of us, not just in love, can kind of wait for external things to change in order for us to change. We're waiting for the relationship to do the things we want to do, to become that beautiful, best version of ourselves. And any powerful woman knows that your circumstances don't need to change for you to change. You change, and then your circumstances will. And so I really believe, like, if you want to call it in, focus less on, you know, what's out there and how to get him, and focus more on who are you going to become, so that he can see you across the room, find you, and be like, that's my queen.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that advice so much. And that's like really about that, like creating that radiance and that magnetism from within, right? It's like it really starts internally as well.
Yeah.
There was so much incredible nuggets inside of there. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. When you said you created your list and you were married, like, was it 2 or 3 years later? Had you created that list like before you met your husband, or had you like met him and then created it?
Yeah, no, it was before. It was like the screenshot in my phone is
Yeah.
on this. My therapist had an easel in her, like, you know, like the ones you have in primary school with like big bits of butcher paper. And we were like
Yeah.
making the list, and we were crossing things out because we realized there were certain things I was putting on this list where she was helping me to see, like, that's coming from your daddy issues, Amy. Like, you want, like, I think I wrote that I wanted like someone who was quite wealthy, who could basically just support me. And it's like that share quote. It's like, Mom, I don't need a rich man. I am a rich man. She was like, you want to be a rich man. Like, that's why you're writing that. And you think right now that you're not capable of like giving that to yourself. And so
Oh.
what I did was I went and like learned how to do that for myself. And then interestingly, you know, like when I met my husband was working in finance, very senior, doing very well. But then we switched roles where I then became the breadwinner, and he went to start his own business and start from scratch. So I did become a rich man, and
Rich woman.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, a rich
Rich
woman. And
woman.
I,
Yeah.
you know, through creating that list, I then went out to like take ownership of what I had control over. And that was a really big theme throughout my therapy, that she encouraged me to do, because I felt so out of control. She was like, take back control. All you have control over is you. So like own it. Take full
Yeah.
autonomy and responsibility for yourself, for your shadows, for your traumas, for the things that you keep choosing. And she was like, and then you'll be powerful, because that's the only thing you have power over. And I really feel like it's great advice for love, because there's so much uncertainty when you're dating, particularly for, you know, my clients who are, some of them, you know, in their 30s, and they're wanting to have kids. And so they're having that anxiety come up where they're like, am I going to meet the one? Am I going to be able to have a family? You know, all of the implications that can come with age as a woman. And, you know, the uncertainty can give rise to certain patterns that are maybe not the most empowering. Like, you're maybe not making your best, most clear-headed choices. And so bringing the focus back to yourself and what you have control over, which is being the best version of yourself, creating a really beautiful life, then the relationship is going to feel like the cherry on the sundae, but you're the sundae because you're already feeling delicious and feeling good.
Yes. Oh, love that. One thing I wanted to ask is sort of like with the feminine and masculine dynamic in relationships as well. Like you were saying, like you became like the breadwinner in that sense. And there's so much talk back and forth you kind of see online around like women are like, no, I want the man to provide for me. Like I want to like lean back and be more in the feminine. But like I see both. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong in that sense. But like what sort of like your take on that, or what have you seen with some of the women that you've worked with as well?
Think everyone is different, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone has different preferences around food, just like they do around money and how that works for their relationship. You know, there's been times where it's felt really empowering for me to be the breadwinner. And then, you know, now as I'm starting to lean towards starting a family and stepping into that. Like I've sort of changed my mind, or my preferences are changing around like how I would want that to work for us. And so I don't think that there are any rules or prescriptive ways that
Mhm.
we need to be. But I think that, women do want to feel provided and protected, provided for and protected by their partner. But how that looks is different for everyone. Like, you can provide for a woman by, making sure that she's safe, making sure that her needs are taken care of, thinking of things that she needs, and, having her back and doing them before she even has to think about it, so she can just relax and not worry. So just thinking of it through the very narrow scope of money, I think is kind of, like narrow in a way. There are so
Mhm.
many ways to make a woman feel loved and safe. And for some people, money is one of those ways. For some women, not having to worry about how the bills are going to be paid, not having to think about it, having their man pull out their wallet in the restaurant, like they get a little sexy kink out of it, right? So I think it's really about figuring out what you like, experimenting, working on that with your partner, and finding the kind of rhythm and dynamic that works for you. And maybe like sort of looking at that again and again through different seasons of your life that you go through.
Yeah, I think that's such beautiful advice because I have seen that rise of like that being talked about so much and like the shifts that are happening because it went from all like be the independent woman and I don't need a man
Mm.
to like now actually it's kind of going back like no, I want the man to provide. Like you just see this such a shift, but I really do feel as well as what you said. It's about finding that rhythm that's going to work best for you, and every relationship is going to be different. Um, Wanted to talk about a little bit as well. I know you help women as well with like their sexuality and being more sensual and bringing more pleasure into life. Another thing that a lot of women can have a lot of shame around as well,
Mm.
and going into different relationships and all that also. And what's like a piece of advice you would offer for a woman who is, really looking to tap into that more sensual side of herself, to really lean into that and feel it more expressed in that way as well, but feels like that, oh, that fear, this discomfort around it.
Yeah, I mean, sensuality is our ability to be connected to our senses, right? So there's a sexual element sometimes to sensuality, but it's not inherently sexual. It's our ability to see things vividly, to smell, to taste, to hear. It's really just being present with the beautiful sensations of life, of being alive. And a lot of the time, those senses are there, but we're not really alive to them, right? Like, how many people have been, you know, driving, and then you suddenly realize, like, oh, how did I get here for the last 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Because your head was somewhere else, or you're doing several things at once, or you're multitasking because you're a mom, and because you're a business owner. And like, we're really a lot of the time on autopilot and not connected to our bodies. And for other people, we're not connected to our bodies because of trauma, which has impacted their interoception, which is, our ability to feel, the sensations and name them in our bodies. So when you work on connecting to those senses, you're not only going to experience more pleasure, you're going to experience more joy, more presence, more meaning, more love, the ability to feel comfortable just being in the simple moments of life and enjoying beauty. I mean, to me, that's like the most spiritual thing you can do. Like, if there's such thing as enlightenment, to me, it's like being able to soak in any moment and just be
Mhm.
fully there. And what a gift to also give your children or your partner, your friends, to be able to be in full, rich presence and comfort in your body and safety in your body. It also just gives rise to a lot of other beautiful things. Like, if you want to be deeply confident and like rooted in yourself, and to be able to walk into any room and be unshakable, no matter what anyone thinks of you, like, you need to feel safe being in your body, not
Mhm.
disconnected from it, not just in your head. So, yeah, sensuality work is really like about so much more than just pleasure, but pleasure can be a really nice doorway into that world. It's a little bit more fun as well because you can experience, you know, some orgasms and breast massage and all of these beautiful practices along the way. But yeah, I think again, it comes back down to the shame that sits underneath the good girl conditioning.
Yeah.
So when we have disconnection from our bodies, if you can't experience really deep pleasure, there's nothing wrong with you and your body isn't broken. There is shame there, and your body is being very intelligent and it's disconnecting from your senses so that you don't have to feel the shame. So if we can get down and gently heal and validate and give that shame some redemption, then you'll be able to experience more pleasure in your body, no matter what you've been through.
Amazing. I think that's going to be so helpful for so many listeners listening to that. I know you've talked a lot about breath work being such a incredible tool for you on your own healing journey as well. Um, what kind of breath work would you suggest to you for someone who is kind
Mhm.
of going through a similar journey around that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have a strong opinion on breath work.
Mhm.
I am a facilitator of rebirthing breath work. So this is conscious connected breathing, but only through the nose. So
Okay.
a lot of popular kinds of breath work are through the mouth. So like holotropic breath work, transformational breath work. There are other kinds that are through the mouth. I'm not 100% anti-mouth breathing because there are some really beautiful short practices of mouth breathing, certain kinds of tantric breathing that are really good for increasing pleasure in the body
Yeah.
and even like enhancing your orgasms. But for long format breath work, you know, where you're breathing 45 minutes, an hour or longer, I use the nose breathing. Firstly, because it completely like helped me heal so much trauma and just changed so many parts of me
Yeah.
changed as a result of rebirthing in really good ways. But it's also more gentle, particularly if you have trauma and if you feel numb sexually or you're having problems in that area, struggles in that area, you probably have some kind of trauma of some variety. And so we want to just gently go in there and heal it instead of re-traumatizing by creating this very strong visceral response in your body, which mouth breathing does for almost everyone. Really,
Mm.
you know, really fast, really hard, and for a long period of time. The same as like if you ever do, you know, anger release practices, for example, screaming, those things can be really good, but it's always in moderation, right? If you're doing it for maybe a couple of minutes, fantastic. If you're screaming like that and breathing heavily through your mouth for an hour, it's very intense on the
Yeah.
nervous system. And so we don't want to create more of that intensity. You know, there are very like rare occasions where it might be appropriate, but we want to get into the subtleties. We want to get into creating a flexible, healthy nervous system bit by bit instead of all at once. And so breathwork is incredibly powerful for healing many things, but the preferred method that I use is rebirthing, the nose breathing in almost all my programs because it helps with everything. Definitely
Okay.
sexual healing.
Yeah, amazing. I'll have to look deeper into that. I've been getting a little bit more into breathwork myself. I love EFT tapping for working through
Mm,
things as well with the nervous system. I found it's had incredible benefits with the women
yeah.
I've worked with as well. But yeah, I think if you are too activated, sometimes it can really just like wreak havoc on your nervous systems and doing it in like long forms of. So I can really see how the rebirthing can be really useful for that as well. I want to talk a little bit about, I know you've got some really incredible, exciting programs coming up and ways people can work with you as well in terms of, yeah, really stepping into that unapologetic woman era, the sexuality work, as well as relationship as well. So yeah, if you want to talk a little bit more about that and where people can find you and work with you.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, best to just check in whenever anyone is listening and just
Mhm.
see what's going on in my world at that time. So my movement is, and when I say movement, like my mission, my
Yeah.
brand is all about the unapologetic woman. And so everything that I create, all of the programs have this intention in mind. It's like helping you to stop going to war with yourself, putting the sword down, putting down the patterns of your good girl, and stepping into the most shameless, beautiful, like not sorry version of yourself. And so probably when this episode is coming out, I will have maybe relaunched Pleasure Empress, which is my most popular program. I'm relaunching it in a new format. It gets better every time I launch it again and again. So I've like been revamping the curriculum, and this is a program if you're wanting to come home to your body, you want to experience deeper self-love, you want to be able to feel your body sensual, excitement. Maybe you want to revamp your relationship. Maybe you want to just be in your power in sex and feel like a queen in that realm of your life. Pleasure Empress is a really beautiful program for that. Or even, like a lot of mums do it when they have felt like their body is no longer theirs because they've been breastfeeding and giving
Yeah.
birth. And so they just want to come back to like the sensual side of themselves that they feel like has been dwindling a bit because they've been, in that mother archetype more so. So that would be a good one for everyone to check out. But yeah, just come and find me on Instagram and see what's popping in my world.
Amazing. And I'll leave all the links in the show notes as well. Amy, thank you so much. It's been such a beautiful conversation. Is there anything, a piece of advice or wisdom that you'd like to leave with any of the ladies listening?
Yeah, there's this thing I keep saying to my friends, which I'll say to you guys. And that is that embarrassment is made up. So you should just do whatever you want, right? Like I say this to people all the time because so many people don't do things because they're embarrassed, because they are afraid of what people think. And it's like, embarrassment is made up. Like it's actually made up. You could choose to see it that way and then be like, well, I'm just going to do what I want.
That is so true. You never really think about it that way. I love that. It's true. Embarrassment is made up. It's just how you perceive it in your mind, right? But yeah.
It's literally made up, right?
Yeah.
Because like, look at the internet. There's things that people post that you probably think, oh my God, I'd never post that, but they're not embarrassed. It's
Yeah.
just a made up like rule in your mind. My dad used to actually say this to me when I was a kid. It's like not even my concept. It's from my dad. He's like embarrassed. He said embarrassment is a pointless emotion. It doesn't have any benefit. So I'm not going to like entertain it.
Wise words, wise man. Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amy's dad, for that wise wisdom.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on. There's so much. I know I'm going to be listening to this episode again as well because I feel like there's just so much to take away from all of that. And yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, we'll chat soon.
Thank you so much.